Hi, and welcome to another episode of Start the Week with Wisdom. I'm your host, Bridget Burns with the University Innovation Alliance.
And I'm Doug Lederman, co-founder of Inside Higher Ed.
Each week, we bring you a short conversation with a leader in the field, typically a sitting college president or chancellor who we think that you should be learning from, someone who we see as inspiring and demonstrating the kind of leadership that we all want to learn from and unpack. So that's why we call it Start the Week with Wisdom, and start on a Monday. Super optimistic, super positive. That's what we're up to.
And the show is sponsored by Mainstay, which is a student engagement and retention platform that likes to prove that it works by through peer-reviewed research. There's a bunch of studies on the mainstay.com website, which I encourage you to check out, about how it helped Georgia State reduce summer melt by 21%, and helped it retain about 1,200 students. Check out that research and find out more about Mainstay at mainstay.com.
And now I'm super excited for us. The show is also sponsored and it's broadcast on the Innovating Together podcast, which is sponsored by the Carnegie Corporation of New York. We are grateful for their support.
And we're joined today by Susanna Rivera-Mills, who's president of Aurora University. She started there in the middle of last year, I think it was. She's before that, she was provost and executive vice president for academic affairs at Ball State. And she and Bridget have a connection that goes back further than that.
She's one of my favorites. I will also add, I first met her at Oregon State University when she was the liaison to the UIA. She really led some groundbreaking, exciting progress there. And then, of course, went on and has just been killing it at Ball State and now at Aurora. So one of my favorite things is former liaisons who have gone on and now lead institutions. And so it's just such a pleasure to watch you continue to rise and the impact that you're continuing to make. So welcome.
Thank you. Thank you, Bridget. Great to be here with you. Looking forward to our conversation.
So I would actually just start off the bat with a little bit about your background. You just our audience just heard my Doug and I's description of where what your trajectory has been like. But I want to tease out one piece here that I find is very interesting. You're a public school person. You've worked at public institutions your whole life. And I find it very interesting, this transition from public to private. And I am just so curious about what led to, I'm just curious about all of that. And I can talk to us about it.
Oh, absolutely. So you're absolutely right. So I have been in higher education for 30 years, and I spent 30 years in public universities in higher education. And it was important for me because, I have been dedicated to providing broad access to underserved, underrepresented populations. So I was very much about the public mission, education for the public good. And I had every intention on staying in the public sector. As a matter of fact, I often admit, that I probably was biased against private education because I felt that it was selective, it was exclusive, it wasn't really serving the population that I had been advocating for my entire career. But then I met Aurora University. They recruited me for this position, and there was one line in that job ad that really caught my attention. And it said, Aurora University is a private university with a public mission. And it kind of really made me ask, I know what that means. I wonder if they know what that means. And so I went through the interview process and they interviewed me, but I also interviewed them. I wanted to know, do they understand what this means? And I was pleasantly surprised that absolutely the population of students that we're educating are our future. They are diverse. They are large percentages of Pell eligible. They come from difficult financial backgrounds. Many of them are first to go to college. And those are the students that we're now educating. So I'm really pleased. And I think it's a privilege to be able to serve as president of an institution that is Hispanic serving, minority serving, and is paying attention to exactly that population.
That's such an interesting composition, right? And unique. I think it's kind of stereotype busting because I'm in the same boat of, I think I do have I'm biased towards publics, but I
Yeah.
also have this bias that I make big assumptions about who they serve. And
Absolutely.
I think that's really refreshing.
And I'll tell you one thing that's really interesting too, is bringing my public university experience into the private world actually creates this sweet spot, this intersection where I am bringing the dedication and the understanding of how we can leverage education as a transformative experience for students to improve their lives. And I bring the transparency and I bring the accountability. But what the private environment offers me is a level of flexibility that allows me to accelerate change in ways that I had not experienced before.
I love that. Can I just also sorry, Doug, I'm like, just don't mind me just dominating the microphone. Am I wrong to think that your student population composition is unique? Or is this a widely held misunderstanding in higher ed? Because I
think it's a little bit of both.
Okay.
I think that there are private institutions that have similar profiles. I know there are other privates that are Hispanic serving, for example, that do address this population. So I think it's a little bit of both. I think you'll still find institutions that are selective and they have their mission and their purpose for who they serve. But I think those of us that are in institutions like Aurora University are understanding the importance of being welcoming, being inclusive, and the fact that this is the future of higher ed, and we are uniquely positioned to shape that future.
Yeah, and I would just add briefly that there are hundreds, I would say, part of the problem is that my colleagues as journalists, I think, misrepresent through our focus on a very narrow sliver of higher education, and at the Ivies and the private institutions that are that exclude more than they include and that have more money than they know what to do with. That is not the situation for most of the CI, Council of Independent College institutions around the country. A lot of religious institutions that have great histories of inclusion, and now there are absolutely institutions that have migrated toward in that direction because the historical students that they educated who were wealthier and more are disappearing, but it's distinctive but not unique, I would definitely say.
Yeah.
The
Well
student
said.
body that you're focused on.
Yeah, indeed.
Well, so let's talk about your leadership style. So I'm familiar, you and I spent a lot of time working with former President Ed Ray, but now you've worked with an array of other institutional leaders. I'm just curious about your leadership style because I saw it when you were working at Oregon State and you were very inclusive, you were very collaborative.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm sure that as you move up, your style has to change a bit because you have to have somewhat more of a buffer because not everyone gets to have access. I'm just curious about your leadership style now, and who do you think has most informed, or what experience has most informed your leadership style?
Right. It's interesting that you say that. I do describe myself as a collaborative leader. And yes, I've had to adapt a bit, but I think at the core, I remain pretty steady and pretty consistent. I had an experience in a person that really began to shape my leadership style even before I thought of myself as a positional leader. And that was actually at Oregon State. When I arrived at Oregon State, my goodness, this must have been back in 2008, something like that. Oregon State had a unique leadership development opportunity for their employees. I'm not sure if it's there still or not, but it was called Journey into Leadership. And Journey into Leadership was a program that was available to Oregon State employees who wanted to just explore leadership opportunities and the leader within, in many ways. We were a cohort of about 40 people, and it was a commitment of 8 weeks, meeting once a week for half a day to explore leadership. And part of that program included bringing other leaders, internal leaders, to be speakers and to lead workshops. Well, through that process, I met Larry Roper. And Larry Roper at the time was Vice President for Student Success. Very beloved at Oregon State, has long retired. And it was my first time meeting Larry. And what really spoke to me and what I connected with was his authenticity. He did an entire workshop around authenticity. And I think, like many leaders, for some reason, I had been, I led to believe that if you were going to step into a role of leadership, that somehow you had to give part of yourself up, that somehow you had to leave something at home and you had to develop this persona of who you wanted to be as a leader. And so to hear him talk from a place of authenticity, to genuinely talk about how he is who he is, how you can bring all of yourself to your job, how you did not have to sacrifice to lead sort of the life that you wanted to be as an administrator, that really moved me. And it really began sort of a process of me asking questions about, well, who am I and who do I want to be at work? And how do I bring my authentic self? How do I ensure that I can have a voice that is heard? So I think that began to shape who am I as a leader? How do I remain authentic in my leadership? And then what does that look like in terms of helping others do the same? And I think that that's where the collaborative power really comes in empowering others to be able to be their authentic selves, no matter where they are in the organization. And that creates an environment where people get pretty excited about coming to work and bringing themselves to move initiatives forward because they're respected, they're included, they're seen, they're heard, and you're not asking people to leave parts of themselves behind, whether it's your gender, whether it's your ethnicity, your background, a number of areas where people may feel like they don't belong there. Here's an opportunity as an authentic leader to create an environment where no, actually you can create a place of belonging for the people that you lead.
I love it. And thank you so much for mentioning Larry, who's the greatest human being of all time. It was very tempting for me to make that a banner of Larry Roper. There's no one who's more significantly impacted my journey as well. He met me when I was an undergrad. He's the greatest human being. And by the way, I occasionally run into him when I walk to work because he lives in Portland and he's just the greatest. So shout out to Larry Roper. But I love this idea of that you don't have to put on like the leadership suit and pretend. I do feel like there is definitely that messaging for young women that when you get to work, you have to all of a sudden turn into some kind of like robot. And boy, talk about like does not inspire anyone to do their best work when you work for someone who has that kind of robot energy.
It's so true. And we're still, we've come a long ways as women leaders, but let's face it, higher education still has a ways to go to really have the number of representative leadership that begins to reflect the student demographics and where our students are, right, that we're serving. So I think it's a very important message for people to realize that, no, you don't have to let go of parts of your identity in order to do this work. It is possible to be who you are and be very successful at what you do.
Love it. Doug, what do you think?
Yes. Well, I don't know. Let's maybe shift toward about what has been, you described sort of your career arc. Are there places where, other than shifting from public to private, which obviously probably sounds like it surprised you a little bit too,
yes.
But what are there other things along your career arc that really surprised you, or that what has that has sort of that you didn't expect, twists that you didn't expect?
Wow. It'd be easy to say everything. And I will tell you why, because my goal, honestly, mind you, I'm a first generation college student. So for me, going to college alone was something that I wasn't sure was going to happen. So to have that come about and be a reality was a huge step forward for me. But after I went to college, really my goal was to be a faculty member, was to teach. So my first love is the classroom. I love the classroom. I love being face-to-face with students. That was my goal. I wanted to be in the classroom. I wanted to be a professor, get tenure, and then that was going to be it. Never did I thought I was, going to go into administration. And so I often describe myself as starting out as an accidental leader, okay, which meant that someone tapped me on the shoulder. And as is the case, as I have heard from many of my women colleagues, it's usually because no one wants the job. It's probably a mess, and somebody wants you to clean up the mess. And that certainly was the case with me. So I was tapped on the shoulder to be department chair at a time when no one wanted the job, no one got along, the department had a huge deficit. And the only reason they came to me, and this is exactly what I was told, is because I was the new kid on the block and I didn't have any history, and therefore nobody had reasons to dislike me yet. So, you know, I remember sitting there and thinking, wow, is that your best sales pitch for this? Because I don't know if it's working. But nevertheless, I said yes. And my intention was to do the job, clean things up, and then head back to the classroom. And so from there, you know, the story is I probably held, I don't know, about 11 or 12 different administrative positions, all with increasing responsibility. And I went from being an accidental leader to being a reluctant leader, because now I knew how much work it was, and I wasn't having too much fun until, and here's the key, until there was a brand new position. It was vice provost for undergraduate education and student success. And when I read that position, I thought, wow, this is what I have been working for my entire career so far. I want to support students. And if I'm going to be in administration, I want to do it in a role that directly supports students. So I applied for that position. I got the position. And then I remember, and this was a pivotal point for me, I remember walking across campus and I saw a group of students that were coming my way, and they said, "Hey, Professor Rivera-Mills, we are so proud of you." And I remember thinking, what are they talking about? And I said, "I'm the one that's supposed to be proud of you." And they said to me, "No, we're proud of you because you're up there. And now that you're up there, we know we can be up there too." And that completely changed who I was as a leader. I felt like they had given me this baton, and I felt like for the first time I was moving from accidental to reluctant to now being very intentional in my leadership. Because now I understood that leading had nothing to do with me, that I was there to represent, that I was given this privilege to sit at tables, to be in rooms where decisions were being made, where so many of these students were not able to be. And now I have this responsibility to ensure that their voices, their needs were heard so that we could make the best decisions with them in mind.
I love that story. And it's also just really, those are helpful lessons. That's wild to me, because I, on the outside, knew when that, I did not understand that context in your leadership journey. But yeah, it's interesting that we always describe it as, you know, you often pick up the tone of it's the dark side to go over. And yet it is really powerful that you need more people being willing, and we need to probably demystify that. We need to change our reputation for what that means to go into administration, but also you cannot get up there if we don't change that.
Exactly.
Yeah, well, that's wonderful. So I feel like I've seen you navigate really complex circumstances, implementing innovation stuff, student success change, all that kind of, and then now you've had to transition between institutions. I bet you have a lot of answers to choose from. So I'm asking a hard question, which is, if there's one decision that you made that you are proudest of, or if there's something that if you have to think back, that like, that's the one, that's the thing up until now, that's the thing I've done that I'm most proud of. I'm curious what that is.
Wow. You know, I think in many ways it is just my general attention to culture. Sometimes we take culture for granted. We bring in a lot of initiatives, a lot of great ideas, a lot of things that we want to do. But I have learned that if you don't pay attention to your people and your culture, your initiatives are only going to go so far. So I have learned to listen more than I say, which it was a wonderful piece of advice that someone once gave me. Just listen more than you say, and know how to ask the right questions. Ask more questions, right? Ask those right questions that will get you a deep understanding of the people and the culture and the community that you're leading. And that is so critical for me. So I think that mindset is actually what helped me navigate the pandemic, which was one of the most difficult things that I think many of us have ever had to do. But it was because I was able to build trust 2 years before the pandemic ever hit that allowed me to accelerate and make decisions that would have been very difficult. And the community trusted me to make those decisions because I had bothered to listen to them, to ask questions, and to develop a deep understanding of what was important to them and build those relationships.
I hadn't even thought about that. That had to be, while I figure, because we sometimes ask people what the hardest thing they've had to do or overcome, and most people answer something related to COVID, but I hadn't thought about the complexity of how long you had been at your institution,
yes,
impacting whether or not you made it through that. And because I actually know quite a few presidents who, or let's say people who came to institutions during COVID that didn't make it because they didn't have that trust, because there wasn't any foundation. So I wonder if there is something there around the specific timing of how long people needed to have roots before to be able to help support communities through that really complex time.
Yeah, and I think you can translate that to, again, any initiative, any transformative initiative that you want to have in your institution. What's the right timing of that? Have you laid out the groundwork that's going to allow you to build that trust to move quickly and to have that initiative be sustainable?
That's good stuff.
Is there a sort of pulling back the frame a little bit, and this can be about what you're doing at Aurora or probably more broadly too, what sort of change do you think is most needed from higher education kind of at this particular time?
You know, I think we need to accelerate change. I'm not sure that there's any one thing. I think we have many things coming our way that are just simply going to require us to respond at a speed that is much faster than we have ever had to respond before. I mean, take AI, an obvious thing, right? We're already behind. We are way behind where we need to be. So in order to accelerate, what is it that we're going to do with AI, right? And it isn't just one thing. It isn't just the question of, you know, are students cheating using AI? That's very basic. It's what are we doing with the curriculum? How are we going to integrate it into learning outcomes? How are we going to make our operations more effective and efficient? How do we leverage the systems that we already have to integrate AI in what we're using? I mean, there's a number of things. And I think that we as leaders in higher education as an industry is now being required to sort of think in multiple levels in order to stay ahead of the rapidly changing dynamics in the workforce, in the world, in our society, in politics. It's just the speed at which things are happening right now is such that we just cannot afford to sit and debate and discuss for too long before taking action.
Amen. I think you're right that it is about speed and pace, because we could point to any number of things and I can make the argument for it, but at some level, it really doesn't matter what the change is if we keep using the same old paths to accelerate. Glacial is not a good look on anyone.
And I'll tell you one thing, Bridget, something I learned, and this was from the University Innovation Alliance during my time there, which I think is also critical, and it goes hand in hand. I actually think we can move faster if we do a better job collaborating and partnering with each other. So again, the power of the University Innovation Alliance is that collaborative culture, right? And I think more and more collaboration is what needs to happen across private, public, industry, however you see that. We have to come together and take the best of what we can contribute so that we can move forward faster. And so more and more collaborating with industry, collaborating with other institutions, universities. How do we complement each other and how do we move away from our competitive mindset to really say, how do we complement so that we can achieve more and have a greater impact on the students who are waiting for us to serve them?
Amen. I 100% agree. I so appreciate that. And it was helpful when I ran into you at an event and when I found out that you had become a president, and then you were sharing that you were using somewhat of the playbook that you had developed within the UIA to move forward on change, both at Ball State and now at Aurora, which is just so gratifying. And then I also got to meet your team that came to the UIA Summit, which I hope they are super motivated and pumped up and excited and taking action. That's it's just really, this is for me, very full circle. Thanks for coming and watching, Doug, while I get to enjoy talking to somebody who I've gotten a chance to see really kind of blossom in so many different ways. So we want to now, this is the rapid fire, where we want to know about the advice that I bet you've been given a ton of advice.
Yeah.
Some of it good, some of it bad. But I'm wondering if there is a piece of advice that someone gave you that has been the most important in your career. What was it and who gave it?
Wow. Okay, so what was it? I remember. I'm not sure who gave it. I would remember, but it really goes back to what I said before, and that is listen more, say less, ask the right questions. It's so critical. No matter where you are, whether you're in a meeting, in a conversation with another individual, or at an institutional level, listen more, say less, ask the right questions.
That is a very powerful. That's a powerful piece of advice, and I think that there's no one who doesn't need that advice as well. So that's great, Doug.
Yeah, and is there a particular sort of advice that you consistently give, other than maybe that one, since you're seems to be a guiding principle for you? But is there advice you consistently give to people who are, coming in behind you and looking to you for that for guidance?
It's usually, be smart about building your network of mentors. We can't do this job alone. I think that we need mentors all the time. I tell people you should have at least 3 great mentors, preferably more, and build that network, because I think that you can get wisdom from a variety of people in a number of ways, and that will help you avoid any landmines, and it will usually help you see opportunities in a different light.
That's good advice. Our last point, which has informed our audience's book collection. So we're wondering if there is a book that has been most useful for you in your leadership journey, whether it's management, leadership, some otherwise, or it could be a podcast or whatever. But is there something that you would offer up? Because we consistently hear from folks that they go out and add these to their library.
So I love to read, and if you go on my website, you'll see what I'm reading any particular year. But there are 2 books that I would highly recommend. One of them is Originals by Adam Grant. And anyone who's trying to look into what it means to be an authentic leader, how to be yourself and bring yourself into leadership, Originals is a great book. And then the second one, for the more pragmatic people, is Atomic Habits by James Clear. I never get tired of reading that. I think it just helps you understand how you can celebrate and pay attention to the smaller ways of moving things forward.
Ooh, those are both really good ones. And I do have, I believe I have them both on my shelf. So that's good. This is good. Good. Well, Susanna, this has been really lovely to get a chance to reconnect with you, and also just hear about your journey from a different perspective. So it's just been wonderful, and I'm really proud of what you're doing, and I'm excited to continue to cheer you on from afar. Doug, you also make me proud, but we'll get to that later. I hope that this has been a useful conversation for those of you at home who are listening, and we will look forward to seeing you all next week.
Great. Thank you both.